I'd like to say that I was going to do a lecture on Purim, but I felt that with all the harrowing experiences that the world is going through right now with the Ukraine, I'm going to talk about the Ukrainian issue. Maybe we can call it Ukrainia. And I would like to talk about specifically the Jewish import in the Jews that came from that country, those lands who have affected in a positive way. But I will talk about, I don't want to get too political, but I do want to talk a little about what has been going on there. 1 second. Okay. I don't see anyone on the screen, but I'm going to talk as if you're there. I'd like to start by saying variation, please, if we can mute, that's the most important thing right now. Variations on the repeating history theme appear alongside debates about attribution. There's an Irish statesman by the name of Edmund Burke some time ago, often misquoted, but he's quoted to have said, "Those who don't know history are designed to repeat it." The wonderful Spanish philosopher George Santayana is credited with somewhat of the same aphorism: "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." And that quote I have read in one of his books. Winston Churchill writes, "Those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it." I would like to, before I start this clip, and it's a soundbite, if a synagogue is looking for a new cantor in this day and age, I'm wondering if this is the cantor that you're looking for. One second. There we go.
איך נפתח פה, איך נפתח פה, איך נפתח פה לפניך דר מתוחים. באלו פנים נשפט שיחי. הלכנו אחרי מסות שווא ומדוחים. עורב ויעזנו מצחים. כמה יסרטנו על יצירים ושלוחים. לא הקשבנו למורים ונשמע למוכיחים. יזמי ידעתה הנידחים. יזמי ידעתה הנידחים. נהרגים, נשחטים ונטבחים. Sorrando mette mia Ein Katim gesuchi Einenu chala Limitzah Leibachti Uzeyafash Levimzachachi
I'm hoping, just a quick aside. So is that the cantor that you would like to start your synagogue with? Just wondering. That cantor was the great, one of the cantor was a sui generis cantor by the name of Leib Glantz. And I highly doubt that any synagogue in today's world would hire the guy. It's stunning what he did, with the incredible emotion that he puts into every prayer. I'm going to share the screen again, and we will move on. This prayer: how can we open our mouths before you, O one who dwells in the heavens? And in what manner can we pour out our words of prayer? We have rejected your upright and honest ways. Instead, we cling to abominations and acts of corruption. And I'm not isolating anyone with this statement, but it's just the way the world is right now. I thought we would begin with that. A poem. When I die, bury me in the middle of the steppe of my Ukraine, so I can seize the broad fields and the Dnipro river, twisting so I can see and hear it roar, roaring, carrying thieves' blood to the ocean. Then I will toss the fields and mountains and burn them all like prayers. I won't know God till then. Stash me away then and split your chains and spatter the soil with blood and fury, having your body back now in our vast family, the free one, the new one. Don't forget to remember me in good-willed words, a word unangered and quiet. This bard of the Ukraine, Taras Shevchenko, not Jewish, born 1814, passes away in 1861, writes most of his poetry in the 1830s, 1840s. Many of the themes that he explores just naturally makes him the national poet of the Ukraine. And what are the themes? Suppression by the Russian Empire, violent unrest, the fight for sovereign independence. Pretty resonant today. He is born as a serf. He travels with his master to St. Petersburg, where a group of artists bought his freedom, and he was 34 years old. And he leads a very interesting life. He yearns for a resting place in the middle of my Ukraine. After his death in St. Petersburg, his friends transported his body right to that hill, overlooking the river Dnipro, which is that river that you see in the screen at the top of the screen. The world waits to see whether Shevchenko's wishes for his country's freedom can also be fulfilled in today's world. of the Cossack generation. That's the last part of the national anthem of the Ukraine. We are proud to be part of the Cossack generation. Who are the Cossacks? They historically, well, a group of predominantly East Slavic Orthodox Christians who became known members of a democratic, self-governing, semi-military communities, many of them originating in the Ukraine area. Also elsewhere, but certainly from the Ukraine. So, and again, the borders are so amorphous in Europe's history, especially the history of, well, I mean, forever until World War II. And obviously, it continues the amorphism of the border. Modern Cossacks trace their heritage to the self-ruling communities of horsemen who appeared in the 14th century, which is now southern Russia and the Ukraine. Until at least the 1630s, these groups remained ethnically and religiously open to virtually anybody. The Slavic element certainly predominated. After World War II, the Soviet Union disbanded, and this is important with relationship to today, and you can see what the anthem is talking about. It disbanded the Cossack units in the Soviet army, and in the perestroika area in the late 1980s, descendants of those Cossacks moved to revive their national traditions, because what the Soviet Union naturally did is to try to make a ethnically clean, I shouldn't say ethnically, a society where everyone is following the same ruler. During the 1990s, regional authorities agreed to hand over some of the local administrative and policing duties to their Cossack hosts. Of the different branches of Cossacks, the only one that documents allowing Jews into their society was the Cossacks of the Ukraine. The Cossacks were generally indifferent, as I said, to religious matters and bore no particular ill will to the Jews specifically. They, as a matter of fact, often included religious Jews among their company. After time, immigration introduced a negative sensibility, and specifically against the Jews from Poland that were migrating to the Ukraine. And let me just say something that's very important, in addition to the words that I've just said. Because of the shtetl, because of the pogroms that happened periodically all over Eastern Europe, there was always migration from Poland to Ukraine, from Ukraine to Lithuania. And again, the borders were very, very, very amorphous. My mother, for example, was born in a city called Reichwald, which is a kind of a German name, but she spoke Polish. And right now it is in Poland. So there's always, and especially with the Jews moving from Eastern Europe to Western Europe, and that's how, you know, if you think about Chazanut, how it developed, because, you know, initially a large part of the tradition was Eastern European, but then with Lewandowski and Zulzer and all those guys, Zulzer and Lewandowski, I should say, and others, they brought the Eastern Chazanut to Western Europe, mostly, and from Turkey too, by the way, mostly because of the migrations. The guilds that were, by the way, and as a result of the migrations, which mean more Jewish people in a certain area because of them, the Cossacks specifically wanted to baptize the Jews at that point. 1587, 1632, that's a 50-year period of a kind of a continuous, at that point, migration from Jews from Poland in the west, a little eastward, south to the Ukraine. So there were guilds that were established, you know, working orders, and they always feared the competition of the Jews. However, the Jews played a prominent part in, you know, finances. You know, that they hired Jews specifically to handle some of the finances. And quite frankly, that served as an important measure as a bar to actual persecution. The Cossack regiments in the Ukraine served administrative purposes besides military and had constant demand, as I said, for able administrators, educated diplomats, and scribes. Although the Cossacks were not particularly religious before the 17th century, it was probable that conversion, the asking for conversion was a way that they were becoming a little more religious-minded. In Galicia, the westernmost area of the Ukraine, Jews were mentioned for the first time in 1030. And for the second part of the 14th century, they were subjects of Polish kings, Ukrainian leaders, and magnates. The Ukrainian Cossack uprising, known as the Khmelnytsky Uprising, 1648 to 1657, 9 years, was a Cossack rebellion that took place that time. They fought against Polish domination, as I've mentioned before. The insurgency was accompanied by mass atrocities committed by the Cossacks against the local civilians, particularly the Jewish population. Of the approximately 55,000 Jews that lived there, 15 to 30,000 of them were killed or taken captive, and 300 Jewish communities were totally destroyed. This uprising had a lasting effect, a lasting impression on the spiritual life of the Jews in the Ukraine and the surrounding areas, Poland too. And we're talking about the Ukraine now. The Polish story is equally dramatic. We'll do that another time. So at that point, in the middle of the 17th century, there was a time of mysticism led by the rabbis, and specifically a gentleman called Baal Shem Tov, who had a profound impact on the Jews of Eastern Europe. This kind of Judaism was called Hasidism. I'm going to mention two of the leaders, this being one of them. That his real name was Yisrael ben Eliezer, but Baal Shem Tov means Master Baal Shem Tov, a good name, master of a good name. He was from Medzbiche, Ukraine, born in a little tiny village called Okopi Gori. There were some other names that I couldn't pronounce, but those are the first two parts of the village's name. And interestingly, it's a town whose whole name means hill fortification of the Holy Trinity. Then at that point, it was a military outpost near the southern border of the Ukraine. So in the Beit Midrash, which is the school, he was also known as another, I say nickname for him was Besht, B-E-S-H-T. So he leads his circle in rituals that he derives from the Kabbalah, such as adding special prayers, kavanot, to the normal prayer ritual that was part of the Siddur. Now, kavanot comes from the word kavanah, which means to pray with feeling. His colleagues considered him an expert in the wisdom of God. And so his emphasis was, and very interesting, and this is, well-known stuff, the idea that all creation contains God's presence, and that one, and very interestingly, can therefore worship God because all creation contains his presence in normal life activities, food, work, even sexual relations could be all means toward establishing a relationship with God. On the other hand, a person should not be concerned with material fortune. Not be concerned. So, because he has to always focus on the divine, never lose sight of the real goal of life, which is achieving a connection, a communion with God. So that would introduce the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, to be present. So he was the generator of this movement called Hasidism, and helped it to become a central central phenomenon in the Jewish history of the modern era. One of the most important, prominent features in the religious, social, world of East European Jewry. The next rabbi, teacher, I don't have a photograph of him, but this was, as a matter of fact, I was looking for one, and they had the same photograph of this next gentleman as they did the Baal Shem Tov. And I kind of looked a little while, but then, no, I gave up. So I guess they didn't have cameras in those days. But the next gentleman is called Nachman of Bratslav. So he's 1772 to 1811. He's the founder of a unique school of Hasidic thought and practice, which continues, by the way, to happen until, including today. He theoretically, I believe, was the great-grandchild of the Baal Shem Tov, which they must have had children when they were 12 those days. He was, obviously, the Baal Shem Tov was born in 1700, and Nachman of Bratslav 1772. I guess that's possible. So he is the first central figure of Hasidism. His idea was one marked by the awareness of a distance from God, by the honest seeker of God, who was deeply attuned to his own shortcomings and failures. In contrast to the joyousness of Baal Shem Tov, Nachman tried to follow or lead for his followers a life of painful struggle to come, as a result of that struggle, to the divine presence. In striving to redeem the lower life of his disciples and himself, he in 1806 begins to tell kind of fairy tales derived from East European folkloric motives, but interwoven with intimations of that Kabbalistic symbolism, and also with an air of mysticism. And historians of modern Jewish literature in Yiddish and Hebrew have regarded his stories as important literary compositions, and they're still studied. His stories are written down. As a matter of fact, there's a wonderful compilation by the great Austrian philosopher Martin Buber, and I've read some of them. And he's such a great writer. It is introduced, it's probable that these stories probably may have influenced Franz Kafka and that very fantastical story and that kind of thing. This next picture is a ritual that happens on Yom Kippur, where the ultra-Orthodox community in the Kiev area go to a place in the city is called Uman, so it's a suburb of Kiev, in celebration of Rosh Hashanah, and they say their prayers. The tomb of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov is somewhere in this, not in the lake, obviously, but in the vicinity of the lake, and they gather together. Matter of fact, I think what I thought I heard was because of the COVID issue, the Ukraine 2 years ago, I think, said that they could not do that en masse. With an exodus from the Ukraine underway, more than 2 million people now, women, children, Ukrainian Jews are pouring out of the country or digging in to fight. And the disaster could probably spell the beginning of another ending of what was really meticulously rebuilt in Ukraine. Yes, the Jews in Ukraine have known a long history of strife, but in the last 30, 40 years, it has improved greatly, obviously to the extent that their president, Zelensky, is a Jew, admitted and proud. Odessa, Ukraine's third most populous city, was once an absolute pillar of European Jewish life, and we'll talk about that. And Kiev, a major place. During World War II, Nazi Germany and its allies killed an estimated 1.5 million Ukrainian Jews out of the 6 million who died across Europe. So this is a major battleground. One of the Shoah, I like to use the word Shoah rather than Holocaust. The Shoah is distinctly talking about the situation in Europe during World War II with the Jews. Occurs in 1941 in a ravine called Babin Yar right near Kiev on the outskirts. In several days, the death squads killed more than 30,000 Jews as part of campaigns across the Soviet Union. This is a harrowing photograph of Soviet prisoners of war being used by the Nazis to cover a mass grave. After the, I didn't want to show you anything worse than this, so I didn't, so there are thousands of people buried in this ravine. This is the ravine that you saw the POWs filling in 2003. Nothing, which is, I guess one can say it's poetic. Let me just move on here. I'd like to now talk about the incredible artistry of some Jews that you may have heard. I think you've probably heard of most of them, probably, but they are incredible poets, writers, musicians, politicians, etc. But I know I'm missing a whole bunch of them. I'm sure, I know that 100%. But with that, my intent was not to miss, but also my intent was to, looking at my phone here, to come up with something that lasted an hour and 15 minutes, hopefully. This is Chaim Nachman Bialik, born in the Ukraine, 1873 to 1934. He is known as Israel's national poet. This is the first and last verse of a wonderful poem, Should You Wish to Know the Source from which your brothers drew their strength of soul, their comfort, courage, patience, trust, and iron might to bear their hardships and suffer without end or measure. And then the last, I probably should have included the whole poem, but the last verse is, and then your heart shall guess the truth, that you have touched the sacred ground of a great people's house of life, and that your eyes do gaze on the treasure of a nation's soul. And that your eyes do gaze on the treasure of a nation's soul. And he was talking about Israel, but in a real sense, with the inhumanity that it's going on now, we can certainly look to the Ukraine and with compassion and prayer, pray for their deliverance from this nightmare. This is just a front page of a book that he wrote, a book of poems, Fun Tsar und Zorn. The book is called From Sorrow, About Sorrow and Rage, published in 1906. The book includes in Shkita Stot, and this is the Yiddish version of Bialik's Hebrew poem about the Kishinev pogrom, again in the Ukraine, of 1903. Shaul Chernyakhovsky, and by the way, with Chaim Nachman Bialik, we have talked about him before, and we have played. So much of his poetry is translated into music by many composers, and so is this Shaul Chernyakhovsky, one of the great Hebrew poets, identified with nature poetry. Let me just read this. Rejoice, rejoice now in the dreams. I, the dreamer, am he who speaks. Rejoice, for I'll have faith in mankind. For in mankind I believe. For my soul still yearns for freedom. I've not sold it to a calf of gold. Not sold it to a calf of gold. For I shall yet have faith in mankind, in its spirit, great and bold. He wrote a poem called Anima Amin that I orchestrated some years ago and sang. It's absolutely beautiful melody. I wanted, and we've done a number of his poems, shown how composers have written music for it. It's so lyrical, so beautiful. Shaul Chernyakhovsky from the Ukraine. Okay, Shalom Aleichem. This is, a real master from the Ukraine. He wrote poems and plays. Obviously, one of his play has been translated to a fairly well-known theater piece by the name of Fiddler on the Roof. He is the Yiddish Mark Twain. If you read his stuff, you're just laughing from door to door. But I will say one other thing. He wrote a book called The Nightingale. I read it a few years ago, and it's a tragic book. I actually was thinking of taking that and using it for material for an opera, where he talks about this young boy who had a beautiful voice, and he goes to a synagogue and starts singing, and everybody says, "Oh my God, what a beautiful voice!" And the cantor trains him. He moves out of his house. This is a noveletta, probably 120 pages. Moves out of his house, stays with the cantor, becomes his mishorer, which means one of the kids in his choir, which, by the way, every cantor worth their anything had a choir. That's just part of the game. If I can explain, I don't want to go too much off the track, but why a choir? It wasn't only to make things more beautiful, it was to allow the chazan, the cantor, to say something, a text, and then you have a chord very quietly behind, and it allowed the cantor to think about what he was going to say next. Well, just that sound, it was a kind of it was the muscle that connected the tendons that connected the muscles together. Incredible stuff. Anyway, let me just finish the story. So the kid becomes really, really famous. He actually falls in love with a girl. The girl actually really likes him. The girl falls in love with him. He becomes a man, but a man meaning teenager, and he promises the girl he'll marry her. He goes traveling over Europe. He's like this Mr. Show business young cantor. Everybody's handsome, and everybody listens to his gorgeous voice. He makes a ton of money. He goes to the United States. He makes even more money, forgets about the girl. And the girl, she wants someone to love her. And she finds an older man who, wants to marry her. And she just can't wait anymore. So she marries the man the day that this cantor, this boy, comes back into town. But he's also had some affairs with other women, but he wants to then marry this girl, and it was too late. And then he ends up as a kind of a lunatic on the streets. It's very tragic, but he's a great storyteller. So if I were you, I would really look into his output. It's fabulous stuff he writes. Okay, moving on. We're going to go to now a couple of I don't want to say politicians, but Zionists, major ones. Jabotinsky was an activist, an orator, and writer. He was, who was his name? Menachem Begin was one of his disciples. So he was a ardent Zionist, born in Odessa, 1880, dies in 1940, actually 59 years old. Obviously, we know Golda Meir, born in Kiev. When she was, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6, she moves to, I believe, Milwaukee in Wisconsin. And obviously, we know that story. I am moving on because I don't want to take too much time in talking about these individual lives. There's so many classical musicians, and we'll talk about them in a second. But now is not the time to play their music. But I'd like to, if you are interested, to explore their musicianship at a later talk. Well, this is one of the great cantors, maybe the cantor that everybody looks to, and that is Yossel Rosenblatt. And I don't want to over talk about him now, but he comes from Ukraine. So many of the Chazanim come from the Ukraine. There's no time to play them all. I will play a few examples. By the way, the gentleman, Leib Glantz, who did Ef Niftach Peh at the opening, is from Kiev. David Naumburg, born in Malin, in the Ukraine, a choir master, composer, and a music teacher. This is a really, really profoundly good musician that no one knows about. Some do, but not too many. Along with several contemporaries of his, he integrates traditional Jewish liturgical modes. Those modes are Ahava Rabbah, Adonai Malach, Magen Avot. I assume you might not know what I'm talking about, and we can get into detail later, but those traditional Jewish modes are made up of scales, but not only scales, they're made up of scales and specific motives in that not harmonic, but that conglomeration of notes of the scale that make it Jewish. And they're named after prayers in the Siddur. More about that later. So, but he integrates those modes with Western harmonies and styles, and in a way he reinvigorates the music for the synagogue. He was the music director and choir master of the Brody Synagogue in Odessa for about 50 years, 50. He was offered the post of assistant conductor to Nissen Blumenthal at the newly built, it was newly built then, that Brody Synagogue in Odessa, and to instruct the choir. And this is a photo, amazing, I got of, the only photo I could find of this choir. What I am told about the choir is that at its largest, it had 100 men to sing the men part, tenor and bass and tenor parts, and 100 boys. At that time, they didn't have women in the choir, and so they needed, treble voices, and they had 100 boys. Unbelievable. And a matter of fact, the only Johann Sebastian Bach did that kind of thing too. And his, I don't think he had 100 boys, but it was the idea that I don't believe women sang the music, except maybe in the coffee cantata. Okay, so so again, back to Nabokovsky. He experiments with the use of Western songs and the German language with traditional Jewish choruses. So I'll give you an example. He uses Handel's Hallelujah chorus from the Messiah, right? Hallelujah, right? And he takes a different text, where it's Psalm 113, Hallelujah Avdei Adonai. 113, that's the first psalm of the Hallel service. But he used the Handel structure for the music of that. Well, actually, Blumenthal did that, the cantor that Nabokovsky was the music director. What Nabokovsky did is he did the same concept, but instead of doing the German, he put Hebrew in there instead. So, for example, Felix Mendelssohn's Opus 91, I think, setting of his Psalm 98, I'm pretty sure that's the opus. For his chorus, he also uses that. And, it actually led to some, I don't want to say notoriety, people would go there because it was visited by many non-Jews simply to listen to the music. By the way, that synagogue had an organ. I would think it didn't use the organ on Shabbat, but it's something to look into. But this is the Ukraine, and at its best, it allowed the Jews to flourish musically and otherwise. Okay, so there is another cantor in 1891, Pinchas Minkowski, replaces the Cantor Blumenthal. And then when he replaces Cantor Blumenthal, he starts to showcase Nabokovsky's compositions. I'm getting to a recording right now, but I want to show you this. It was Minkowski, Cantor Minkowski, that proclaimed Nabokovsky a genius. And he writes a autobiography of himself, and then he keeps talking about Nabokovsky there. He writes that Nabokovsky never resorted to lemonade music, with what he means by that, like cadenzas from Italian operas, as they do in America. This is what he writes. So during his time at Brody, Nabokovsky taught music at the Odessa Orphan Asylum, as well as 3 other music schools, because he got to make a living, and later became a professor of theory and harmony at the People's Conservatory of Odessa. With the opening of the pogroms in 1881 that happened in the Odessa area, the position of the Jewish population in Odessa obviously declined. They moved out. Nabokovsky dies on the 25th of July, 1921, after a 2-3 year period of very deadly pogroms. He's poor, deserted. None of his works have been published, and he left a wife and 5 children. By the way, a wonderful sculpture of Batya Leshinsky was also born in Malin. I just want to give you just as many examples as I can. She's a Ukrainian-born pioneering Israeli sculptor. She works with stone. She was born in 1900, dies in 1992, not too long ago. She creates portraits and memorials commemorating the people and events of the early years of the state of Israel. Many busts, many she creates, they portray cultural and political figures, as well as members of her family, while her monumental memorials, as you see one of them here, are dedicated to those who were killed in the War of Independence. It's a really wonderful sculpture. And you go to Israel, you can see a number of her things. This one is, I believe, in Jerusalem in the park near the university on the western side of the city. But back to what I'm trying to talk about, Nabokovsky. This is the opening of a piece called Ana Tavo, which is done on Yom Kippur. The paragraph after Ana Tavo I didn't include. I should, but for sake of time, which is the Ashamnu, Bagadnu, that kind of thing, when you do this. But this is the Ana Tavo. Now, I apologize because I gotta have someone help me because I'm not sure how to do this. But when I pull sections of film from a concert that we did some time ago, and it's actually synced in the thing, the syncing gets messed up. So, but the music, you can close your eyes and listen. If you'll see Ellery Mirabel and Harold Geeter and Rich Lieberfarb, I'm sure, and Matt Seidel and all those guys. This was done probably 1997. Well, was that a year ago or 25 years ago? I don't know. Anyways, what my point is, really, this is great music, really, really great music. I orchestrated it, but that's another story, but the music is really good. Oh, by the way, the cantor is, what's his name? Oh my God, Moshe. I'll remember. I can't remember now.
Langsner.
And by the way, I had a brain freeze. This is my good friend, and he's a wonderful cantor. He's 20 some 5 years older than when he was there. His name is Yossi Malavani. He's one of the really, really great musicians that I've worked with over the years. Just a natural pianist. I don't have to worry about where he is on the page. He knows where I am. I know where he is. He had a really fabulous chazan, and one of the great ones of the last 50 years for sure. Pinchas Minkowski, I mentioned him before. He took over from Novakovsky. No, he didn't take over. He was the cantor when Novakovsky, that whole thing ended. He goes to New York, to the Eldridge Street Synagogue in southern Manhattan. I think you probably know where that is. When he's 29, 30 years old. By the way, the leaders of the Eldridge Street Synagogue knew that Minkowski's name alone, because it was like people would go crazy during those years and into maybe the 1930s and 40s. Later than that, where cantors, they would go, even in New York, they'd be around the block on a Shabbat, on a Sabbath, to listen to these great voices. So they knew his name alone would help attract an audience for their newly built synagogue. But you should really go there if you can. It's really great. But to lure him from Odessa, they offered him, ready for this, a first-class transit to New York with his family, 6 weeks of vacation, and a 5-year contract of, you'll be shocked, big money, $2,500 a year. Yeah. So anyway, he could have made himself a very comfortable life for himself in New York City. He returned to Odessa in 1892, just 5 years after he arrived to New York. Just did not like it there. And he's a wonderful composer too, by the way. This is an Adon Olam of his by Pinchas Minkowski. Again, this is really, really top line Jewish music. Where is it? And you will probably recognize the cantor and maybe other. Obviously, the cantor is Ozzy Schwartz. We all know Ozzy here as one of the great cantors of our time. The conductor is a gentleman, very wonderful conductor. He actually preceded those of you who know Mati Lazar, the conductor of the Zamir Choir. He preceded him, and then he, I don't know how many years ago, in the 70s maybe, or even earlier, he went to Israel, and he's there now. He's conducted the Haifa Symphony. The organist, the piano player, was my dearest friend, Raymond Goldstein, who wrote all that fabulous arrangements for male choir. Just a beautiful, and Minkowski, let's talk about him a little. Very, very lyrical, very, very beautiful, loving, special. Moving on. We don't have time to listen to these really, really, really great musicians. These are 5 examples of violinists, all from the Ukraine. Leonid Kogan, a great violinist. Isaac Stern, we all know from this country, but he was born in Odessa. David and Igor Oistrach, the father and son. David Oistrach, one of the all-time greats. And then also one of the all-time greats is Nathan Milstein. He is, there's not much I can say about them, but maybe at another time. As a matter of fact, I gave a talk about students of Leopold's Hour about a year ago, and Nathan Milstein and Yasha Heifetz and a bunch of other incredible violinists were students of Hour. It's a small world with these gentlemen. Anyway, we're going to move on. We can talk about them at another time, but all Ukrainians. Pianists. Ashura Shurkhovsky specializes in this, I put it, like the smaller repertoire, romantic, of course, but he didn't play big concertos and stuff like that sometimes, but he'd do these small little, Schubert and Grieg and just, Schumann. Also he actually played contemporary music too. He was very brave in that regard. Well, the second guy right below him is, admittedly one of the, great pianists of the 20th century, Vladimir Horowitz. Not much can be said except that. We can talk about him extensively another time. I included Sergei Prokofiev, because I wanted to. I mean, he wrote a piece called it's kind of a theme of Jewish themes for chamber ensemble. He's not Jewish, but he's Ukrainian, and I think in honor of what they're going through right now, if we include everybody, I think it's a good thing. Emil Gilels, along with did not play like Horowitz, but oh my God, one of the great pianists of the 20th century, one of the great pianists of all time, Emil Gilels. All these from the Ukraine. Gregor Pedagorsky, also from the Ukraine, one of the all-time great cellists. Lived a large part of his life in this country, but he would team up with Heifetz and Rubinstein, and oh my God, I wish I was back in those years. They knew how to make music. Again, we're not going to talk about him. Moving on. Okay, so there's a gentleman by the name of Mark Warshawski, and he was born in Ukraine. He in Odessa, 1848, dies in 1907, not that old. He was a Yiddish language folk poet and a composer born in Odessa. In 1890, he meets with the playwright Sholem Aleichem, and then after listening to his songs, Warshawski's songs, Sholem Aleichem writes, "I simply hugged him and kissed him. And then I say to him, Villain, why do you not print such songs? If I did not know that these are your songs, I would swear I heard them sometime performed by my mother." So he had a really, and you'll see, I hope, what I'm saying. So later on, with Aleichem's full cooperation, he publishes his first collection, Yiddische Volkslieder, Jewish people's songs, with a foreword by Aleichem. The book was not only published in Russia, but abroad as well. And this is one of his songs. I apologize if I make mistakes. I don't know, whatever, we'll see. I'm singing it and I orchestrate it. Here we go. From Pripyat.
Oi, from Pripyat.
Pripyatschik brennt auf Feuer, und in Stub in Heiß, und der Rebel lernt kleine Kinderlach, dein Alles. Und der Rebel lernt kleine Kinderlach, dein Alles. Zedje Kinderlach, gedenkje Teiere, wo sie lernt do. Sag je noch einmal und noch einmal, komm es Aleph, Sag je noch einmal in Tage noch einmal, komm es Aleph. Läufe Pripyatschik brennt auf Feuer, und in Sturm in Heiß, und der Rebel lernt kleine Kinderlach, dein Aleph ist. Und der Rebel lernt kleine Kinderlach, dein Aleph ist. Sesche Kinderlach, gedenkje Teiere, wo sie lernt do. Sag je noch einmal und hacke noch einmal, komm jetzt alle. Sag je noch einmal und hacke noch einmal, komm jetzt alle.
And this is a song about teaching your child how to read. It's a beautiful song, very simple. Shalom Sekunda, also born in, I believe, Odessa, I'm not sure, but definitely the Ukraine, comes to the United States a fairly early time in his life. Wonderful musician. He's written some operas, but most of all, he, Olszynski, and a few others, Elstein, and Rubshinsky, those four were the movers and shakers of the Second Avenue Theater, the Jewish Yiddish theater. So this you might know is another great song, and this we're talking about simple songs. But Warshawski also Sekunda in a way. This is, here we go. Let's see what this sounds like. Okay.
Du sollst sein schwarz wie a Tute, wenn die hat Augen wie bei a Kutte. Und wenn die Hitze bisslich hast, hissene Fieslich, so geht du sag mich nicht. Wenn die hast a narischen Schmecken, und wenn die hast bei soßen Seiken, wenn du bist wild wie ein Indianer, bist a Führer Galaxianer, so geht du sag mich nicht.
Sag mir, wie der letzte Dus, wenn ich zum Mal
Bei mir bist die schön, bei mir hast die kein, bei mir bist die eine auf der Welt. Bei mir bist die Gift, bei mir hast die Kind, bei mir bist die Teiere von Geld. Viel schöne Mägler haben schon gewollt, nehmen mir den Finsee alle ausgeklippt. Hab ich nur dir, weil bei mir bist die schön, bei mir hast die kein. Bei mir bist die eine Leute Welt. Jede
Wir singen hele Farben, schön gewohnt, nennen wir Rhythmen, sie alle euch geglückt. Ob ich nur dir, bei mir bist du schön, bei mir hast du Fame, bei mir bist du einer auf der
Okay, this is a piece called Glick by another composer, Olszewski, who was also born in the, all these people born in the Ukraine. Obviously, I don't even say it anymore because I think it's obvious. I think we're going to skip this. I would like to maybe do a talk on his music as well as the four of them would be a wonderful, fun foray. So we're going to skip this for the sake of time. Yeah, Alexander Olszewski. Jacob Weinberg, wonderful composer. He wrote an opera called The Pioneers, of which I've orchestrated some of that stuff in the past years, a couple, three arias from it. 1879, 1956. He even goes to Israel. He certainly comes to the United States, and I believe he's passed away in New York. But this is a little piece called, and we've done this piece too here. It is called The Maypole for clarinet and orchestra, and this, in this case, is conducted by what's his name, Eli Jaffe, who is the conductor of the Great Synagogue Choir with Naftali Hirschtig and other people too. So here we go. Oh, Jared Schwartz. Just a beautiful example of Eastern European music where he includes the kind of a klezmer-like quality to many of his compositions. This is a beautiful piece that as I said, we have done here also. Moving on, we normally would, if it was a 7-hour lecture, we would include having recordings of Yossele Rosenblatt, David Reutman. Oh my God, what a Chazan! Gershon Sirota, who was a lot of people would say the Caruso of the cantors, and Mordechai Hirschman, who was a poet in his own right. I did include some of these recordings, but I'm looking at the time now, and I want to leave you in a place where you'll come back. So, but let me just play the opening of the Reutman and see what you think. I'll play the opening of these things. This is poetry in action, and what I want you to do while you're listening to this is listen to the choir. And they do exactly what I'm saying. In other words, they give the cantor a chance to rest and think about the text.
ממנו מוסוס דאבו ליבנו וחתורנו דאבו ליבנו
etc. We'll move on. This is Zhytomyr, part of a suburb of Kiev, the birthplace of Pierre Pinchik, another wonderful, wonderful cantor. And this is he's singing actually a piece that is based on mystical poetry. Basically, we talked about I can't remember the text at all. 1 second. The Hasidim. We talked about the Hasidim, and so this is that kind of this mystical text. Let's listen to the opening. This is with the great, she's a wonderful cantor, one of my favorite people to work with, Steinsnyder, Faith Steinsnyder. Opening. Very mystical, very, for me, very spiritual music. And that was the music of Pierre Pinchik, born in a suburb of Kiev in 1893. One of the great, great cantors. He didn't have a big voice, but it just, everything was poetry out of his mouth. This Moshe Genshov is the youngest of the cantors that I've picked for today. He's born in Odessa. He comes a fairly young age to the United States. He's a cantor in Toledo, Ohio. I would call him the last of that great line of cantors, that really, master and student that everybody had. There was a line there, much like in classical music, you had Mozart who played with Haydn, who knew Beethoven. There was that connection. And in the cantors thing, when you talk about the golden age, he was pretty much, I think, the last of that great connection. And there are some, obviously there's Naftali Hirschtig and maybe I shouldn't put him in that position, but a great, great cantor. This is a piece of his called Hoshana, and it's done on Shavuot. And it talks about the beauty of the Holy Temple. Just a great piyut. I believe it's for the second day of Sukkot, second day of Sukkot. etc. We don't have time to do the whole thing, but this is just a gorgeous piece by Cantor Ness. We're going to skip Lev Glantz because I could do him for days and days, but we don't have the time. I would like to end, talk about Lazar Weiner, born also in Cherkazy, excuse me, in the Ukraine, 1897 to 1972. He is a very interesting character. He's a conductor of Yiddish choruses, a really, really good musician. He has a son, I forgot his first name, Lazar Weiner, and his son is a composer, also Weiner, but spells his name Yehudi Weiner. That's right, with a Y, not an E-I, W-Y-I-N-E-R. But he is, Lazar Weiner is the essence, his music. When he comes to this country, only when he comes to this country, he associates with Yiddish poets. And he writes not songs like Warshawski and Sholem Sekunda, which are theater songs. He writes art songs in the sense of, like Schubert would write an art song, like Brahms, like Joel Engel in Hebrew, and other Milner in Yiddish. But he really takes that genre to its heights, and it's all in the United States. I want to now play. I think I will end by playing a short piece. It's a Yiddish folk song that he arranges called Micah Mashmalan, which means how do we learn? And I was, I put this video together thinking about what is going on in the Ukraine now, especially with the children. Just harrowing to see, and Russian children, Ukrainian children, Jewish children, everybody. But this song is in Yiddish. I'm singing it, and I hope that you'll take something from it.
Die Scheiben gleichen sich wie Triebe Tränen, und die Stiefel, die zerriesen, und es werden das Ablotte, bald wenn euch der Winter kommen, kommt kein Micah Mashmalan, das Lied, wo gelost es mir zu Herz, skapet es trieb der Heile, uns wird bald mir nicht werden, also ich sang ich do in Kleise, wie ein in Tinkel, wie sich wenn, als heut mir heugen, in der Stille, in Misrach winkel.
Thank you. We move on and hope for the best, pray for the best. Thank you for listening. There's so much more to say. I would say invariably, I work really diligently about these things, and I always end up with 1,000 times more material than we have time for. So I guess that's a good thing. So, but I'm just looking at these notes. Leah Katz writes, "Are we back in the Catskills?" I believe it was Sholem Sekunda who was the first director of the Concord. The music director. So these guys were maybe it was Olshensky. One of those guys were in the all of them were in the Concord at one time. It's like that statement from the Helm, Helm, the town of Helm, that area is in Poland, but it's like 2 miles away from the Ukraine. I mean, it really doesn't matter. It's when you talk with, especially with the migration, Helm is the Ukraine. The Ukraine is Poland. It's so variable and everything. So, but the one of the great lines I like in the Wise Men of Helm, it says something like, if I can remember, "Are you from Helm? Isn't everybody?" So anyway, thank you all for being here, and it's beautiful. Thank you. If you have any questions, I'm more than willing to answer.
Joseph, it's great to hear you. I'm 3,000 miles away, but still enjoy every moment.
Thank you so much, Harold. It was a pleasure. Pleasure knowing
It
you.
was a great hour and a half.
Yes,
Sitting-
Joseph, it was
Yeah,
really
really was.
great.
It was great. Thank you so much, Cantor. It was very relaxing.
Thank you.
It
Thank you,
was,
Melanie.
it was wonderful.
And it's nice to see Harold and Ava there.
I'll just show you what it looks like out my door. See if I.
As a good Graziano, thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank you, Paul, for being there, for being my co-host. He makes everything work, And thank you all for keeping muted, because then we had a kind of a an easy time at it. Albert, thank you, everybody. Andrea,
Thank you, Cantor.
Yeah, thank you so much,
you.
Cantor. Thank you. Nice
Thank
seeing
you.
you.
You'll be at Union tonight?
Thank you, Cantor. It was superb.
Thank
It was
you
for
very much.
Hassan.
Wonderful hour.
Thanks,
Speechless.
Laura.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Will you be at Minion tonight,
He needs
Joseph?
more than an hour.
No, this is the rabbi's turn.
Okay.
Okay, take care, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
You too.
Thank you,
Stay
Joseph.
warm out there, the weather.
Thank you. This was
Thanks.
magnificent.
Very interesting. Thanks.
Joseph, the images were haunting. They were just
It
beautiful.
was magnificent.
We're talking about the last song?
Oh,
Yeah, and some other ones also.
Yeah,
The people, the Ukrainian
Yes.
people.
Yeah, well, I tried to, I mean, it was a difficult, for me, it was difficult because,
Oh.
I didn't want to make it too Jewish on one hand, and I didn't want to make any kind of critical comments, but that's the history, and so I decided to start with, those who forget history are condemned to repeat it. It's horrible. It's horrible what's going on.
Yeah, and the kids, the little kids singing the national
Oh,
anthem.
yeah, that was great.
I put in the chat, I put in at the Hartford Symphony concerts this whole weekend, the daughter of one of the second violinists,
It was,
who's a Ukrainian, sang the national anthem.
wow.
I couldn't tell how old she was. She had to be in her 20s, I think.
You know what I liked about this version is they did it with the traditional instruments of the Ukraine. So that was
Right.
fun. So
Yeah.
but, yeah. Okay, everybody,
Joseph,
I'm
I
off
made
to
this
doing.
for Man's birthday.
Very nice.
Oh, I love it. It's great, Joanne. It's awesome.
Yeah,
I
well,
love it.
okay,
Hassan, I
I
am
got-
grateful. Hassan, I am
everybody.
grateful
I love
that
it.
you are
You want me to call you?
ours. Do you hear me?
Yeah, Barbara, what did you say?
I said, I am grateful that you are ours.
Oh,
Thank
Yes,
you.
I am too.
I'm grateful that
Thank
you're- I'm grateful that
can't-
all
I
of you are
can't
ours too.
I can't
Very
even
well.
speak. I
Take
am
care, everybody.
speechless. I'll see you.
Take care, Albert.
Be
See ya.
well.
Thank you. It's
Thank
beautiful.
you.
Really, really well done.